So I've done a number of videos about how to increase calories when you're reverse dieting, but one of the common questions I've been getting lately is what about which macros you should increase? So today I'm going to talk about not only how to get your rough starting macros, but also how you should increase your carbs, protein, and fat with your weekly adjustments. Hey, this is Colin DeWaay. If you want to master your metabolism and finally create forever results, start now by subscribing and click on that bell notification so you don't miss anything. So first of all, if you don't know how fast to increase calories when reverse dieting, that means you missed my last video about reverse dieting, so I will put that link in the description below that you can check out after this video is done. But when it comes down to which macronutrients you should increase, well, of course, it depends. But before we get into the increases though, first I want to talk about how to get your rough starting macros if you're not sure where to begin. Of course, this requires you to know how many calories you're consuming, but if you don't know, you can get this first by taking the next week, eating the same way you've been eating, and then divide the total number of calories through 7 days divided by 7, and that's going to give you a rough starting point. Now, when it comes to setting your macro split, a lot of people like to use percentages, but I don't recommend that because your protein should stay relatively the same no matter what phase you're in. So if you're to go with percentages when your calories are higher before starting your cut, then you take a percentage after you cut your calories, it's going to be a smaller number, and you do not want to cut your protein when you start your cutting phase. It's important to keep protein up not only because it helps you protect your lean body mass, but it also suppresses the hormone ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So when that becomes elevated by eating protein and suppressing that, you'll feel less hungry. Not to mention it has the added benefit of having a high thermic effect of food, so you burn more calories. Anyway, when setting macro targets, you want to start with protein because it's by far the most important one for all the reasons I just gave you. Now, as far as setting your protein macro, I recommend eating around 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. So for instance, if you were 180 pounds and you were to eat 1 gram per pound of body weight, you'd eat 180 grams of protein. If you're closer to the obese side, now this would be overkill and be pretty difficult to do. And a lot of people will say to use lean body mass equations, but personally, I think it's much simpler to just take whatever your rough goal weight is and use that. Once you have your protein macro set, the next one you want to look at is fat. And here we do look at percentages, and I recommend eating between about 20 to 30% of your calories from fat. Keep in mind that fat has 9 calories per gram, whereas carbs and protein are both 4 calories per gram. I tell you this because you need to know this to be able to do these equations. So for instance, if you're eating 1800 calories and you're doing 25% of your calories from fat, 1800 calories times 0.25 is 450, divide that by 9, and that would leave you with 50 grams of fat. Now, if you prefer fat more than carbs, then you'll want to aim towards the higher side of the 20 to 30%, whereas if you like carbs more than fat, then you might want to stick more towards the lower side. Now, you can do more than 30%, especially if you just really like fat or notice that your body feels better on it, but I wouldn't recommend going below 20%. This is to make sure that you have enough for things like hormones, digestion, and nutrient uptake. Then once you have your protein and fat set, then the rest of your calories would come from carbs. So if we were to use the same equation before of 1800 calories, if you take the same 180 grams of protein times 4 calories per gram would be 720, and then the 450 calories we get from having 25% of our calories from fat, 1800 minus 720 minus 450 would leave 630 calories left over for carbs. 630 divided by 4 would be about 158 grams of carbs to round out your macros. All right, so now you have your starting macros, so the next question becomes, which macros should you increase when you're going through your weekly adjustments during the reverse diet? Most importantly though, I don't want you to stress out and overthink this. The fact is, if your calories are going up, regardless of which macros they're coming from, you are going to help your metabolism. That being said, there can be some situations where it might make more sense to start with a certain macro, so let's talk about these situations. Since we know protein is the most important macro, if your protein is low and not at that range that I talked about before, then I would start by increasing calories through protein. For one, if getting more protein in is a struggle for you, making smaller increases each week can be more realistic than making one drastic increase. For instance, let's say you were taking in 60 grams of protein per day as it is now, but you should be eating more like 140 grams of protein. You're gonna have a hard time making that big of a jump, but if you're gonna say, for instance, do 10 grams of protein each week, eventually you'll get that number up where it needs to be, and it'll be easier to manage with the smaller increases. Not only that, but the benefit of increasing your calories through protein is extremely difficult to store as body fat, so it really is damn near free calories. I mean, not exactly, but it's about as close as it gets. And the point is, it'll make it easier to maintain your weight going through this process with more protein. Now, if you're already good with your protein though, then the next macro I would look at is fat, because if that number is currently below 20% of your total calories or below 40 grams of fat for men or 30 grams of fat for women, then it might be a good idea to start with fat. And this is because a lot of the things I mentioned before about how fat helps with hormones, digestion, and your body just needs a certain amount to function properly. But if your protein and fat are both already in a good place, then you can increase more through carbs or a combination of carbs and fat. But that said, I will say this. I have noticed in the earlier stages when people make bigger increases through carbs, it seems like the process tends to go a little better as long as their fat isn't too low. And this is probably because your body's main energy source comes from carbs, and there's a good chance energy is going to be lower at the end of a dieting phase. And not only that, but carbs is going to create a little bit more of an anabolic environment than fat will. Plus, it just seems like the extra carbs kind of help upregulate things and get you feeling better, recovering better, which can allow for basically everything to start functioning better. All that said, however, as calories get higher, whether you're going more through carbs or fat matters less. So if you feel like one more than the other, just roll with it. Or if you want more of a balance of the two, that's fine. Again, don't overthink it, and it really just comes down to preference. In fact, this is a good strategy you can take, especially as calories get higher, and just give yourself a calorie target and a protein target, and don't even care about carbs and fats, because as calories do get high, you're going to have a sufficient amount of both no matter what, and this will allow you to be more flexible and enjoy the process. Now, with all that being said, there are 8 things about reverse dieting that I don't think you understand. So to make sure you understand these common misconceptions, make sure you check out this top video, and I'll walk you through these myths and set you up for success. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.